They say the loudest heartbreaks come with screaming matches and slammed doors, but sometimes it's just a quiet sentence at the edge of a doorway. No yelling, no chaos, just 7 small words that changed everything. This is between family, Mom. We'll let you know later. That's what my son said, standing in front of my husband's study, blocking me from the room. I had just brewed coffee, put out the good china, smoothed my dress like it was Thanksgiving. And yet, I was no longer invited, no longer counted. Not even a chair was pulled out for me. 45 years of marriage, 45 years of motherhood, and in that single moment, I was erased. Not with violence, not with cruelty, but with silence. I remember standing there, hands trembling slightly, surrounded by portraits I'd framed, memories I had cooked and cleaned and sacrificed for, and I realized they were in that room deciding what counted as family, and I wasn't in it anymore. This isn't a story about revenge. It's not a story about slamming doors or screaming back. It's about something quieter, something deeper. What happens when your own child quietly decides that you no longer matter? And what you do next when no one thinks you have the strength to answer back? My name is Debbie Reynolds. I'm 74 years old, and this is the story of how I was erased and how I chose to write myself back in. The truth is, that house wasn't just a house. Not to me, not to James. Every tile in the kitchen, every stubborn floorboard that creaked when you stepped just right, every crooked picture frame on the hallway wall, James and I built that together. Not with contractors or blueprints, but with birthdays and burnt dinners and midnight dances to music only we could hear.
James had always been strong, not in the loud, boastful way, but in the steady, hold your hand through the storm kind of way. He was my anchor, the man who painted the nursery at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, the man who made a 3rd cup of coffee because I liked the way the kitchen smelled when it brewed. So when he sat at the kitchen table one day, thinner than I'd ever seen him, and reached for my hand, I knew something was wrong. The light in his eyes hadn't faded, but there was something different in his grip, a finality. "Debbie," he said, voice low, "I need to talk to you about something serious." I thought it was about pain medication or another treatment plan, maybe the next round of hospice arrangements. I braced myself for the worst, at least the worst I thought I could imagine. But instead, he said something I wasn't prepared for. I updated the wheel. I blinked. "The wheel?" He nodded slowly, watching me. "Michael, he's not the same." I tried to smile, tried to wave it off. "He's just stressed. He worries." But James shook his head, not angry, just tired. "No, he doesn't look at you the way a son should look at his mother anymore. He looks at you like you're in the way." That pierced deeper than I let him see. I tried to protest, to say Michael was just busy, that the business world changes people. But James had already seen something I hadn't let myself admit. He leaned closer. "Debbie," he said, "they're planning something, Debbie. Him and Sophia. I've heard them whispering when they thought I was asleep. Not about my care, about your place in the picture after I'm gone. It didn't make sense, or maybe I just didn't want it to. He squeezed my hand gently. You need to promise me something. I nodded, the way you do when you love someone more than the truth. Promise me you'll be ready. When I'm gone, don't just disappear. I said I would, but deep down, I didn't believe I'd need to, because in my heart, I still thought, he's our son. He would never. But the cracks were already forming. I just hadn't seen them yet. James passed quietly 10 months after his diagnosis. I was by his side the entire time, through every scan, every appointment, every night when he couldn't sleep from the pain. I fed him when he couldn't hold a spoon, brushed his hair when he no longer noticed, held his hand when his voice slipped away. Michael came sometimes, always with a laptop, always whispering in corners with Sophia. I tried not to notice. I told myself he was just managing responsibilities. But one afternoon, I found a printout in the trash, something about asset reallocation. It meant nothing to me at the time, but later I would remember it, like a single thread unraveling from a tightly woven life. Until the day he closed that door. This is between family, Mom. That's when the crack turned into a fracture. That's when I felt the shift. And that night, I opened James's drawer and found the brass key, the one he pressed into my hand 2 weeks before he died. Only after I'm gone, he had whispered, when you see who they really are. I didn't know what he meant at the time. I wanted to believe it was just his fear speaking. But sitting alone in the hallway, heart pounding in a house full of memories, I realized it was time to find out. The next morning, I drove to Valley Trust Bank. The brass key James had given me felt heavier than it looked, like it carried more than metal, like it carried every word he hadn't been able to say. Box number 209. The manager recognized James's name immediately. Your husband left very specific instructions, he said, guiding me to a small, private room. Inside the safe deposit box were only 3 things: a manila envelope with my name in James's handwriting, a small leather folder marked Power of Attorney and Financial Docs, and a USB drive. I opened the envelope first. Inside was the updated will, notarized, witnessed, dated, just 6 months before he passed. And it said what I never expected, but somewhere deep down had begun to hope. James had left everything to me: the house, the pension, the accounts, everything. Michael's provision was conditional, small, measured. James had seen the shift, the calculations behind the charm, the planning behind the polite smiles. I sat there in that bank room, staring at his signature, and felt something stir in me. Not joy, not triumph, but truth. James had seen what I didn't want to see, and he left me the tools to stand, even after he was gone. But it wasn't until 2 days later that I saw the full picture. It was a Thursday. The doorbell rang just after I'd folded the laundry. I wiped my hands, expecting a neighbor or maybe a package. Instead, I found a man in a navy blazer and a woman with a clipboard. "Hi, we're here for the showing," she said brightly. Your son said it was fine to come early. I blinked. Showing? They exchanged a quick look. The man turned his phone toward me. A listing. My address. Photos of my home. My kitchen. My bedroom. Michael had listed the house. Not someday. Not after discussion. Not with consent. He was selling it now, while I was still living in it. I closed the door softly, not out of politeness, because something inside me had gone quiet. Not weak, quiet in the way an earthquake goes quiet before the ground splits open. That evening, I poured a cup of tea, sat in James's old chair, and watched the video on the USB drive.
It opened with James sitting in his study. His voice was thin, but his eyes were still sharp. "Debbie," he said, "if you're watching this, then you've seen it." He explained everything, how Michael had started quietly moving funds, how he'd used an old power of attorney from 2 years ago to open lines of credit in my name, how he and Sophia had toured retirement facilities without telling me. "They're not protecting you. They're removing you," James said. I paused the video. Let the words settle. Removing me? Not out of anger, not even with malice, but like I was inconvenient, a logistical problem, a puzzle piece that no longer fit into their design. I thought of all the holidays I had cooked, the times I babysat when they needed to travel, the way I'd folded Michael's laundry when he was sick at age 10 and cried because the dryer shranked his favorite shirt. And now I was a transaction. The next morning, I checked the mailbox, not because I expected anything warm, but because I feared what might arrive next. And there it was, a notice of non-payment, a personal line of credit in my name from a bank I'd never spoken to. I checked the signature. It looked like mine, almost, but it wasn't. I opened James's folder from the bank, compared signatures side by side, and there it was, the difference between my careful looped D and Michael's hurried imitation. They had forged my name, opened accounts, taken out loans, filed for home equity, against the roof still over my head. I didn't scream. I didn't call. I brewed tea, sat in James's chair, and opened the back of his notebook. One name written in pencil. Walter Griffin. Trust everything to him. I called that afternoon. Walter didn't sound surprised. "Have you seen the video?" he asked. I said yes. "James was thorough," he said gently. "He loved you. He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." The next morning, I walked into Walter's office. I wore my blue wool coat, the one James said made my eyes look like water. And for the first time in weeks, I stood straighter. Because now I wasn't just grieving, I was preparing. Walter handed me a folder. Inside were documents that made my breath catch. Not just the updated will, but notarized neurological evaluations confirming James was of sound mind when he signed it. Itemized records in his handwriting, tracking every suspicious move Michael had made in the last 18 months. There was even a bank statement from the week James was in the ICU, $20,000 withdrawn, discreetly, unexplained. And worse, a transcript of a recorded conversation. Michael and a financial planner. We'll move Mom to a facility, consolidate assets, liquidate the house. It'll be smoother that way. Not if, not maybe, a done deal. They weren't waiting for me to agree. They were removing me like a piece on a chessboard. Walter placed a small envelope on top of the folder. "He left you one more thing," he said, "a flash drive, just a week before he passed." I brought it home, locked the door, made tea, sat at James's old desk, and pressed play. There he was, pale, thin, but still my James, still my anchor. "Sunshine, if you're seeing this, it means it's time." His voice cracked. "Michael, he isn't looking out for you. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. But the evidence says otherwise. They're moving you quietly. They're not trying to help. They're trying to take control." He paused, swallowed, then added, "I didn't confront him because I knew how he'd spin it. Say we were confused, old, emotional. I didn't fight with words. I fought with truth. And I've given you all of it. Now you decide what to do with it." When the screen went dark, I sat in silence. But it wasn't grief anymore. It was clarity. I spent the next day gathering everything: the will, the evaluations, the forged signatures, the photos of them touring senior facilities without me. I placed it all in a navy blue folder. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I picked up the phone and called my son. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, chipper. "I was just about to call you. Thought we could go over some estate things this weekend." I kept my voice steady. "I think we should meet, in person, to talk everything through." A pause. Then, "Of course, Sophie and I were thinking the same." We scheduled it for Sunday. They thought they were walking into a victory lap, a final push toward their plan. But I had already spoken to Walter, filed the will into probate, consulted with the bank, confirmed the fraudulent loans. I wasn't walking into that room for their agenda. I was walking in for mine. That Sunday morning, I wore James's favorite navy blouse, the one with the pearl buttons he always said made me look like I belonged in a courtroom drama. I brushed my hair, applied soft pink lipstick, slid the tote bag into my tote bag. When they arrived, 5 minutes late, they brought coffee and bright smiles like always. "This won't take long," Michael said, placing a hand on my shoulder like I was an elderly neighbor who needed help balancing her checkbook. Sophia added, "We've mapped out a great plan. We think it'll make things so much easier." I nodded politely. Let them lead me into the dining room, where documents were already spread out across the table. Charts, budgets, a listing sheet for an assisted living apartment with garden access and private balconies. They spoke in practiced tones, streamlined, optimized, best for everyone. I said nothing. I waited. When Michael slid the final paper toward me, I reached into my tote and pulled out my folder. Quietly, no drama, No theatrics. I laid it on the table. Michael frowned. "What's this?" "Something you left out of your plan," I replied. I slid the updated will across the table. Sophia leaned in. Her face paled. "This leaves everything to you," she whispered. I nodded. "Yes, because your father saw what was coming." Michael scoffed. "That's not possible. He didn't say anything to me." I looked him in the eye. He didn't have to. He trusted me. I reached back into the folder, pulled out the forensic reports, the forged signatures, the financial records. "These documents," I said, "prove more than intent. They prove action." Michael went pale. "Mom, we signed those together when Dad was sick. Don't you remember?" I kept my voice calm. I remember every moment, and so does the bank's handwriting analyst. They both sat back, stunned. The silence between us didn't feel like tension. It felt like truth settling in. Michael tried once more. "You can't handle this all alone. You're 74. I smiled softly. "I may be 74, but I'm not alone. I have a lawyer, a plan, and now peace of mind." Sophia snapped. "You can't take that house with you forever." "Maybe not, but if I leave it, it'll be on my terms, not yours." They left quietly. No slammed doors, just silence. And that night, I sat on the porch, tea in hand, watching the tulips bloom. Red and gold, James's favorite colors. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply let the wind pass through me, because something had shifted, and now it was my turn to decide what stayed and what no longer belonged. After they left that Sunday, the house didn't feel haunted. It didn't feel tense. It just felt mine. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe inside my own walls. I stood in the hallway where James's slippers used to sit and whispered, "We're okay now." And I think somewhere in the stillness, he heard me. The next week, I had the locks changed, transferred the utilities back to my name. I shredded old papers, not out of spite, but to make space, not just in drawers and closets, but in myself. I took down the photos of Michael from the hallway, not in anger, but because blank walls can become invitations for new beginnings. I kept one, though, a small picture from his 5th birthday. He had cake on his cheeks, and James was in the background laughing. I placed it in a drawer, not as a wound, but as a reminder. People change, and sometimes they come back. But if they do, they'll have to meet me where I am now, not where they left me. I joined a watercolor class at the community center on Tuesdays. I hadn't painted in years. My first piece was messy, the proportions were off, but it felt honest, real. I learned to cook for one, took slow walks in the morning, reorganized the study into a writing room. The guest bedroom that had once been reserved for Michael and Sophia became a sewing and reading room. It smelled like lavender and old paperbacks and peace. The silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like freedom. I didn't check the mailbox with dread anymore. I didn't walk on eggshells wondering if my life was being repackaged without me. Then, one afternoon, I opened the mailbox and saw it. An envelope, Michael's handwriting. I knew it instantly. Inside, a card. No long letter, no explanations, just one line. "If you're willing, I'd like to talk. I held it for a long time, let my thumb trace the edge. Then I tucked it into my journal and whispered, maybe, but not on your terms. 6 months passed. The seasons shifted. Tulips bloomed and fell. Tomatoes ripened in the raised beds I built with Robert, James's oldest friend, and now a quiet presence in my life. He came by with croissants some mornings, never pressing, just being. One day, he looked around the house and said, "You've made this place feel new again." I smiled. It still creaks in all the same places. He nodded, sipped his coffee, then looked out the window. "James would be proud of you." My eyes stung at that. I didn't reply, not because I had nothing to say, but because some truths don't need to be spoken aloud. The house was different now. The dining table was moved closer to the window where the morning light hit best. The couch faced the garden. The walls had new frames, paintings I'd made, not just photos of who I used to be. And then, one Tuesday, the phone rang. I recognized the number. "Hi, Mom," Michael said. His voice was different, smaller, unsure. I waited. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I've started therapy. Sophia and we've separated. Silence. "I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. I've been thinking a lot." I let the silence stretch, not to punish, but to protect. Finally, I said, "I'm glad you're getting help." He exhaled. "Would it be okay if I called again sometime?" I paused. Then, "Yes, but not to talk about the past, only the present. If you want to know me now, you start here." He agreed quietly. We hung up, and I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the wind move through the trees, and whispered, more to myself than anyone, "It's never too late, but it has to be real." The calls came once in a while after that. Simple, awkward, but honest. He didn't ask for money, didn't mention the house. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made me start to believe. Because sometimes redemption doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with silence and someone finally deciding to listen. Some evenings now I sit at the old desk, the one that used to be James's, and write. Not to publish, not for legacy, just for me. And maybe one day for someone else who needs it. I've been writing a memoir, nothing fancy, just stories, memories, lines I didn't get to say out loud when the world was too loud to hear them. I have titled it The Quiet Room, because that's where they left me once, in silence. Outside the door of my husband's study, shut out of a conversation about my own life, treated like an afterthought. But it's also where I rose from, where I stopped waiting to be invited in, where I realized I didn't need to knock on their door to be valid. I had a room of my own, a voice of my own, a name still written in ink. They tried to erase me gently, with meetings behind closed doors, signatures that weren't mine, phone calls I wasn't copied on, and phrases like, "This is just what's best." But I didn't disappear because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to be erased. Sometimes it waits quietly until the time is right, and then it picks up the pen. If you've ever felt like someone tried to erase you, like your love didn't count anymore, like your presence had become inconvenient, like the space you created for others had no room left for you, I just want to say this. You are still here, and you matter more than you know. Maybe you're watching this from a quiet kitchen. Maybe your name has been taken off decisions. Maybe people you once held in your arms now look through you like you're made of smoke. But hear me now, you are not smoke. You are the foundation they built on. You are the memory in the walls, the softness in the silence, the echo in the laughter they no longer remember. And your story isn't over. You can still turn the page, rearrange the furniture, reclaim the space. Take long walks, plant tulips, laugh with someone who brings you croissants and doesn't ask for anything in return. You can write yourself back in. And if you're not ready for all of that just yet, if all you can say right now is a whisper, let that whisper be this: I'm still here. Say it in the comments if you want, or just say it to yourself, because sometimes saying it out loud is where healing begins.